Joining me now is Nazlan Ertan. She's a journalist for Al Monitor who has lived in Turkey for more than 20 years. Thanks for being with us today. Now, while an earthquake, of course, is a natural disaster, many argue that the scale of the devastation here in Turkey and in northern Syria, but particularly in eastern Turkey, is man-made. What do you make of the government's latest drive to criminalise contractors?
Well, you are right when you say that this is a question, who is to blame for this disaster? Yes, as President Erdogan said, this is the tragedy of the century, but could it have been avoided? And that's the question many Turks are asking themselves all across the country, because for a long time we have known that we have been living on a crisscross of seismic fault lines. And I am not in the region, but actually I'm joining you from Izmir, which has experienced its earthquake in 2020. So when we look at the drive, when we look at the situation, we know that a large responsibility lies in shoddy construction, and that in itself finds itself in three ways. One is the use of bad material, ancient methods of construction, which should have been avoided with 2018 regulations. And some of those buildings were great, or looked great on paper, but in fact they weren't, as we have seen them collapse.
We have these badly constructed buildings. Some contractors have been arrested, but what about local municipalities that are supposed to be checking this work? Will the investigations extend into the checks and balances of the governments in control of these cities?
That is to be expected, and that was actually my second point. While some of the buildings were okay to begin with, the municipalities often looked the other way when there were changes made in the buildings, such as cutting the load-carrying columns, or actually adding a floor, adding a story on top of it, which made the buildings weaker at the end. And I think there is another third part where the local authorities and the central authority have a responsibility together, that is giving zoning amnesties and zoning permissions to areas where there should not have been high-rises to begin with. So what we see is a very complicated level of authorization and authority, and that is what we will be looking probably in the next few months to come.
What about the government's response? I mean, many survivors say the scarcity of trained rescue squads and heavy machinery during those critical first days most likely increased the death toll because many people who could have been saved were not. Why was the government so slow to respond?
I think there were two main points. One was actually also had to do with the construction. Many of the roads, the main roads, were blocked. We have seen that. We have also seen that some of the main outlets were not particularly easy for the rescuers to go in. And the second thing, of course, as one of the politicians have said, that everything was so very centralized that it did not make quick response very easy. Many of those rescuers who went to the region found that they were simply waiting for orders to come rather than set to work immediately.
But hang on, the Turkish government set up a tax fund following the 1999 earthquake, where people were taxed a certain amount that would help fund an emergency fund that would be able to be set up for major disasters like this. From what I understand, it was at around $3 billion, but analysts say that money was squandered on other projects. So is it also possible that the government didn't have the resources available to respond, nor the training?
Well, actually, what we have seen is that in 2012, the government has come up with a very detailed national earthquake action plan. And that particular plan was very detailed. It was, 85 pages, and it more or less foresaw everything from strengthened first reaction to better communications, better roads, and strengthening the buildings. And as you are right to point out, this was going to be financed with the earthquake tax that all Turks have been paying since 1999 Istanbul.
Which has now been spent on other things.
which actually, and it seems, although there has been new constructions in the region, these were not particularly strong constructions, and there has not been a sizable strengthening of the existing buildings.
Okay, and with the election coming up mid-year, this could possibly be the greatest threat to Erdogan's political future, could it not? How might it impact his re-election bid, do you think?
I think all sides, now that the first statements that we have seen was about national unity, etc., but now as the death roll rises, people have started allocating the blame. Erdogan, for his part, has been very quick in coming up with a response, saying that he was going to rebuild the area, and he was going to come up with allocations to the people touched by it.
I think that that's going to be very, very unconvincing for the millions of people that are being affected by this, and not to mention the families of the possibly more than 50,000 that are killed. Thank you, Nazlan Ertan, for your time.